The date is July 30th, 1868. In the city of Spring Wells, Michigan, a little boy is born by the name of Henry. During this time, Henry's father is a farmer, and this is a time where there is no modern equipment to make something easier. And being a farmer is one of the hardest jobs in the world. You have to work hard night and day, and maybe by the end of the year, you'll have some produce to show for it if it doesn't get killed by pests. Henry slowly grows up and realizes that his father has a terrible job, and he feels bad for him. And alongside all of this, he despises farming. So Henry's father is a farmer, and he's destined to be a farmer as well. But he has an opportunity that's very special to him, and it was becoming more popular every day. The city of Detroit, which was about 10 miles away where Henry lived. You have to know that during this time, Detroit is the most important industrial city in all of the United States, and you could say it was the most important area in the Industrial Revolution. Since Henry was so close to all this industry and innovation, he got familiar with it at a very young age. He loved it so much that he was fascinated with industry, and he wanted to learn as much as possible. Like for example, when his neighbor's pocket watch broke, he told him, "I can fix it," even though he had no idea what he's doing. He just wanted to take it apart to learn how it works. When Henry turns 14 for the very first time, he sees a steam engine. He loves it so much that he has to figure out how everything works. He wants to know how this giant train is moving with this engine. He was always trying to get a job in this industry to figure out how a steam engine is working and how he can work on it. He would always ask for a job, but since he was still a child, meaning 14 years old, they wouldn't give him a job. But since the Industrial Revolution is booming and they need a lot of employees, they tell him to come back when he's 16 years old. Then we can hire you. When Henry turns 16, he doesn't get a job at the train tracks. He gets a job at a shop where he becomes a mechanic for steam engines. In the year 1880, when Henry Ford is 17 years old, he sees something especially weird. An Englishman shows him a gasoline engine working for the very first time. An engine that was made by a German engineer named Nicholas Otto. And this engine wasn't designed to be in anything. He just wanted to show the world that engines can work with gasoline rather than steam. Henry was only 17 when he saw this engine for the first time, but his mind began to race and he wanted to figure out how everything works. He studies and figures out everything about this gasoline engine, but he doesn't understand one specific thing, and that's electricity, how this engine accepts sparks and continues to work. And that is why he went and got a job in Edison Electric. He was trying to figure out how the electricity works in an engine rather than the mechanical, since he already mastered that part. This Edison factory would give electricity to 1,000 homes in Michigan. Henry is such a valuable employee to this company that every day he grows and grows. And eventually, when he's 28 years old, he becomes the chief engineer. It's at this time that Henry Ford designs his very first gasoline engine. When Henry Ford designed his first engine, up next was to take this engine and put it and design a type of motor vehicle. Henry Ford's first car was made in the year 1896, when he's only 33 years old. And he also gave it a name, quadricycle. Henry had also designed a 2-speed gearbox for it, and it was working, but it didn't have a cooling system, so when he started driving it, it would overheat. He eventually added the radiator to his vehicle, and it didn't have the cooling system problem anymore. And when it's fixed, a customer shows up and offers him $200 for the quadricycle. Henry was actually pleased because of this offer. He was gonna sell it and go design a better quadricycle. He got $200, which is about $6,000 in today's money, and sold the quadricycle. Henry designs his next vehicle, but not for sale. He was only doing it specifically for testing because he wanted to fix all the problems and make it better and better. And then eventually, in the year 1899, he begins his company. If you've seen our video about Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla, you know that Thomas Edison had a whole lot of investors. And of course, Henry Ford used to work for the company, so these investors were familiar with him. And when they realized that Ford has began his own company, they wanted to invest in it because he was someone to be trusted and they knew he has a lot of passion for what he does. He began building his new quadricycle in a new factory, but nothing was going his way. He worked for 2 years straight, but only 20 quadricycles are built. Henry tells himself there's something missing. Why does it take so long to get a car finished? How can we speed up production? In this case, the company was making $0 and losing money. And this is the main reason that all those investors asked for their money back. And when an investor asks for their money back, the company goes out of business and Henry Ford is poor again. You might know this, but successful people don't just give up after a failure like this. They become even more passionate about what they do. Even though he's a poor man again, he keeps telling himself how can he speed up the process of building these quadricycles. You could say he was spending most of his time drawing designs on how to make these vehicles better, and of course, making a new invention called the assembly line work better. He designs a car that's better than the quadricycle, but most of his time is still being spent on the design of the factory itself rather than the car. All these thoughts and designs that went through Henry Ford's head, it caused the most important invention of the 20th century to be born, the assembly line. When we get to 1905, Henry Ford has saved some money and he rents out a warehouse once again, a warehouse that has the first assembly line. Only 1 year later, in the year 1906, 300 people work at Ford Motor Company and 25 vehicles are exiting the factory every day. The production was going great and the assembly line was working, but Henry Ford was still not satisfied. He knew he could make everything better. In 1906, Ford does another important thing. He creates another factory called the Ford Engine Company to design his own engines and transmissions, which was extremely important for speeding up production. But not only did this speed up the process of production, it actually made the vehicle cost to be cheaper. The most amount of time that was wasted in a factory like this was waiting for parts, but you no longer had to wait for it anymore. Henry Ford's vision was basically any American should be able to afford a car, because before him, cars were only meant for wealthy people and kings. When we get to 1908, the first Model T that looks like this is finally released. A simple car that looks good, that doesn't have problems, and since it was meant to be cheap as possible, they were all painted black. He had successfully made a car that every American was able to afford one. A 1908 Model T cost about $850. When the Model T is announced in 1908 and the American people see its picture and price on the newspaper, they go crazy and they want to order one. In the first week, 25,000 Model Ts were ordered. Henry Ford wasn't able to fulfill all the orders, but he delivered 17,000 of them. When he realizes what kind of an idea he had set up, he creates another factory that's much better set up, and it's perfect for speed. And of course, it's much bigger. And before the factory was ready, Henry Ford's #1 goal was speed. That is why every year it would exponentially grow production. In the year 1910, about 20,000 Ford Model Ts are being released per year. But 6 years later, in the year 1916, more than 500,000 Ford Model Ts are being built. Henry had an idea that when he's making more money, he wants people to profit as well. And this is in a way where he was building the cheapest car in the world. In 1908, the Ford Model T was $850 each. But how much do you think this car was 8 years later in the year 1916? $360, and that means it was cut in more than half. And of course, his idea was every American should be able to afford the car. He had created such a revolutionary company that for more than 2 decades, he was on the tippity top, and no other car manufacturer was able to compete with him. And around this time, more than 60% of the cars on the American road were Ford Model T. And eventually, at the end of the 1920s, other American car manufacturers were able to compete with him. Companies like Dodge, Chrysler, and General Motors. And at this time, Dodge and Chrysler aren't together. After all this is happening, Henry Ford is one of the richest people in the world. Not as rich as John D. Rockefeller or Andrew Carnegie. If you've seen our video about the history of Volkswagen, you'll know that Adolf Hitler was obsessed with Henry Ford, and the idea of the Volkswagen came up because of Henry Ford himself. He liked Henry Ford so much that he even had a picture of him in his office, and he considered him a hero. Until the age of 81, Henry Ford was basically in charge of everything in the Ford Motor Company, and it has grown so much that it's a much different company than it began with. In World War II, the company was so big that they would build Boeing bombers inside the Ford Motor Company factories because Boeing didn't have enough space, so they had to go to the biggest factory in America, which was Ford. In the year 1945, when Henry Ford has a lot of heart problems and he can't continue working anymore, he chooses his grandson as the next president of the Ford Motor Company, Henry Ford II, because his son had died 2 years before this because of stomach cancer. But it seems like Henry Ford wasn't enjoying retirement, because 2 years after, in the year of 1947, because of a heart attack, he passes away. Right now, the Ford Motor Company is one of the biggest car manufacturers in the world. And of course, most of it is in stockholder hands. But the Ford family still has a lot of voting power, 40% to be exact. You can find Ford factories in all 4 corners of the world, and some of their product is the #1 seller in the world. The F-150 is the most sold car in America.